птички с фортепиано. Уважаю. Не скажу. Это называется женщина себя любит. Да, любит себя, да.
All right, let's turn to the Trump campaign's on.
Я не хочу, чтобы моя жена тебя любила. И моя мама, и моя дочка тоже не хочу, чтобы тебя любила. И заплакала дитя, да. Спасайся, спасайся. Нет, это разные вещи. Ну, ладно, понимаю. Хорошо.
Ongoing legal battles. NBC's chief White House correspondent Hallie Jackson. Has the latest on that. Hi, Hallie. Morning.
Savannah, good morning to you. Those already chaotic legal battles are getting even messier, with one of the president's highest profile allies basically accusing his attorneys of incompetence. The Trump campaign today is trying to distance itself from what typically is only a formality.
Thank you very much.
Two key deadlines today set to deliver two more blows to the president's push to deny the election results, with Michigan and Pennsylvania both ready to officially certify their vote totals, showing Joe Biden as the winner, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie slamming the Trump team.
The conduct of the president's legal team has been a national embarrassment.
Now, the Trump campaign's trying to distance itself from controversial attorney Sidney Powell. Powell's among those pushing a convoluted conspiracy theory claiming an international plot involving, in part, a dead dictator led to stolen votes.
That's when they came in the back door with all the mail-in ballots, many of which they had actually fabricated.
There's no evidence of any of it. In Pennsylvania, yet another Trump lawsuit now dismissed. A federal judge, in a scathing ruling, writing Rudy Giuliani and the campaign asked him to, quote, disenfranchise almost 7 million voters in the state based on speculative accusations, adding, this is simply not how the Constitution works. Now, more Republicans are calling on the president to let the transition begin in weekend, should stop golfing and concede.
Frankly, I'm embarrassed that more people in the party aren't speaking up.
President Trump requesting a recount in Georgia now, taxpayers footing the bill, even after an automatic hand recount shows Biden leading with nearly 13,000 votes. And in Michigan, the state's Republican chair and the head of the Republican National Committee are asking for a 2-week delay in certifying the vote total showing Biden won there. The move attacked by critics who worry it's part of a broader push to pressure state legislators to override the will of the voters and give electoral votes instead to President Trump, an extreme and legally dubious strategy the Trump campaign is now openly discussing.
Will it go to those state legislators?
Well, that's a possibility.
Hallie, you mentioned the president's allies are also pushing for Michigan to delay its certification. What are you hearing about whether that could actually happen, and what happens if they don't certify by today?
So let me take those two questions. It's not clear what's actually going to happen. Not even some of the people on the board who are set to certify that vote say they know how this is going to go. 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats sit in on that state canvassing board. Typically, their job is to give the stamp of approval to Michigan's results. Right now, the margin favors Joe Biden by 150,000 votes plus. That's a lot. Both sides are really bracing for some potential drama today. One of those Republican board members is telling the New York Times he's gotten hundreds of messages from people pressuring him one way or the other. So if the board does end up deadlocked, right, what happens if it's a 2-2 split? That's not the end of it. Democrats are expected to ask the state appeals court to then step in.
Words have power. The ones we write, the ones we speak, the ones we think, the ones we sing. Our words create the world we live in. Our voices have power. Let's find your voice. I'm Alicia, and this is my masterclass.
From Steinway Hall in London, and I'm going to be talking about how to begin a new piece. And the first thing I would suggest not doing when you're learning a piece is to go straight to the piano, but to have a little look and do some research and find out what was going on in the composer's mind, at the composer's life. If the music was dedicated to somebody, who was it dedicated to? What was the background to the piece? Because you'd be surprised that some of the most famous pieces have got the most interesting backgrounds, and it really does help us to perform if we can understand and appreciate what that is. The next thing I would do, because you're probably going to listen to a few recordings, listen critically. Do a little bit of reflection after you listen. So what you'll probably want to do is to listen to a number of different recordings and make some bullet point notes about what it was you liked about a particular performance, what it was that maybe you didn't like so much. And that will help you to decide what you want to bring out of the piece for yourself. And it's a very good way of doing this. We're actually writing it down and reflecting on what you've heard. The next thing I advise doing is making a photocopy of the piece so that you can mark it up with your own annotations for analysis. I'm a great believer in analysis. If you know the form and the shape of the piece, write it on the photocopy. The other thing we can do a lot is to spend some time before we even begin work at the piano, taking the score away from the piano and seeing how much of it we can understand away from the piano. Most of the great concert pianists of the world do this to some extent or other, some longer than others. They don't go straight to the piano. So that's the first thing I would say. Now, the next thing I would do with a new piece, once you start going to the keyboard, you've got some idea of how you want the piece to sound, or you've got a clear idea of what the piece sounds. You've got some, I would do with a new piece. Once you start going to the keyboard, you've got some idea of how you want the piece to sound, or you've got a clear idea of what the piece sounds like. would be to start off at the speed of no mistakes. And that is a tempo where you can manage the notes, the rhythms, the fingerings, and if you can, the dynamics, but that could come a little later. But I've taken for my test piece, as it were, my example piece, the first arabesque of Debussy, which I'm sure is familiar to you. That's the introduction, which is what I'm going to look at now. I don't have time to look at more, but I'll look at the introductory 4 bars, 5 bars. And what I would do first is to take a very small section, and it could be half a bar, which is what I'm going to do now. And when I play, I'm engaging what I call my PPR radar, my personalized pattern recognition radar. And I'm looking for designs in the music, shapes in the music, designs. So let's have a look and see what we've got here. Ah, yes, I notice that I've got broken chords. And if I look a little closer, it's a chord of A major with a passing note, and then another chord that comes down of G sharp minor. So I'm understanding the structure of the music as best I can. A chord of F sharp minor with a passing note and a chord of E major on the way down. Now you notice what I'm not doing. I'm not going straight for my pedal. The pedal is something that we can we can get too reliant on, and it comes. Covers up all sorts of flaws in the hand, what the hands are not doing. So my first suggestion here would be avoid the pedal for the moment and see if you can, when you pass one thumb to the next thumb, do that beautifully, smoothly, evenly, like this. And I could, if I wanted to, just stop there for a moment and then restart from the top. Get ready. And work in half bar units. Now if we look at bar number 3, if I deconstruct this a little bit, Debussy's marked this up really clearly. We've got a bass line that with stems down, that goes down in minims, that's half notes, and that's descending. And I can't resist singing when I play a line. It helps us to understand how the music really flows if we can put it into our voice. Effectively what we're doing is we're putting it into our system in a different way, in another way, in an extra way. Not just from the fingers, but through our voice as well. And I notice there I've got 5 notes that descend. Now what else happens in the left hand? Some harmony notes. And in the right hand I've got 2 elements as well. A melody line on the top. We might imagine a flute here. Different end note there, and again some harmony notes in the middle. So I would very much advise starting off separate hands. I've got this expression I use, the 3 S's: slowly, separately, sections. So you'll be able to hear some music in the background. That's because we're coming live from Steinway Hall, and it is a piano showroom. So I'm sure it won't disturb you. So when I'm ready to put that hands together, what I can do is again work in very, very small sections. I'm going for half bars. and stop. Make sure, check in with my body. Am I loose? Did I do that freely, loosely? Did I sound good? If I didn't sound good, if there were harsh sounds coming out of the piano, probably means there's some tension somewhere. So then I would repeat that until I was happy with that before I go on. It's really as simple as that. Now, if there's a tied note in the story here, you can put the tied note down silently before you go on. I'm now on my second half bar. And I work through systematically like that. And when I'm comfortable with half bar units, then I can gradually put these together and make whole bar units. Listening intently. Stop. And repeating if I need to finesse the sound, to make sure that I'm feeling very coordinated and that I'm creating the sounds that I want. When we come to bar 5 in the left hand, we've got quite a lot of notes here. And again, I can do the same job there. I can piece that together by starting off with just one beat. Stop. And then go back. Maybe I can add another beat the next time. Stop on the half bar point. And then I stop on the last beat of the bar. And then I can add my last beat and then go over the bar line. So I call these controlled stops rather than accidental stops, because I've decided where I'm going to stop, and I don't go on until I'm happy that what I've produced is accurate and it sounds good and it feels good. Now let's have a little look at the strands separately idea, because it's obvious that hands separately, we play the right, then we play the left, but a lot of music is built up in multiple layers, and three-part textures are very, very common, particularly in the Romantic period. You all know this. Now I use this example a lot, and the reason I use it a lot is because it's familiar to most people. Now if we have a little look at the Gluck, the melody from Orfeo, which I played as my introductory music, and let me remind you of it. We've got a beautiful melody on the top, a bass line that moves in whole beats. Silotti has given that separate stems. Then we've got chords in the middle. Now let me first of all block the chords out. I'm going to actually start in bar 3 because bar 2 there's an obstacle there. Let me go to bar 3 and I'm going to block out the chords first. And again, if I can label them, chord 5-7, chord 1, chord 5, and then you get a German 6. Whole beats. Silotti has given that separate stems. Then we've got chords in the middle. Now let me first of all block the chords. A bass line that moves in whole beats. Silotti has given that separate stems. Then we've got chords in the middle. Now let me first of all block the chords out. I'm going to actually start in bar 3 because bar 2 there's an obstacle there. Let me go to bar 3 and I'm going to block out the chords first. And again, if I can label them, chord 5-7, chord 1, chord 5, and then you get a German 6. Don't worry too much about that, but if you can label it, so much the better. Now what would I do next? Well, I think rather than just put that together opened up in the way that Silotti has organized it, I think I would do this process, which I find incredibly useful for lots of things. Rather than play the 3 notes of the chord, I'm going to play just the lowest note each time and really feel the distance between my pinky and the next finger. Then I'd go through it again, this time to the middle note. And again, I'm sensitive to the feeling in my hand, to the sensation in my hand. And then finally to the octave, really feeling that octave, feeling the intonation of the octave, you know, the melodic distance there between the bottom and the top. Then I can start putting that together in combinations of two. How about I go for the lowest two note? Again, I'm setting the distance between my pinky and the which I find incredibly useful for lots of things. Rather than play the three notes of the chord opened up in the way that Silotti has organized it, I think I would do this process, which I find incredibly useful for lots of things. Rather than play the three notes of the chord, I'm going to play just the lowest note each time. And really
Stems, это bars, лиги, Stem. Да нет, это не тот. Надо туда. Представляешь, может, язык не надо будет учить даже. Ну не совсем так, конечно, но тем не менее. Представляешь, насколько удобно это было бы делать? Ну как бы да, черта. Проще так делать. Это разделение там. Ну, нет,
and again, if I can label them chord 5-7, chord 1, chord 5, and then you get a German 6. Don't worry too much about that, but if you can label it, so much the better. Now, what would I do next? Well, I think rather than just put that together opened up in the way that Silotti has organized it, I think I would do this process, which I find incredibly useful for lots of things. Rather than play the three notes of the chord, I'm going to play just the lowest note each time and really feel the distance between my pinky and the next finger. Then I'd go through it again, this time to the middle note. And again, I'm sensitive to the feeling in my hand, to the sensation in my hand. And then finally to the octave, really feeling that octave, feeling the intonation of the octave, you know, the melodic distance there between the bottom and the top. Then I can start putting that together in combinations of 2. How about I go for the lowest 2 notes, missing out the thumb, but covering the thumb. In other words, my hand is positioned so that the thumb is on the note that it needs to play, but I just don't play it. Then I can do the top and the bottom note without the middle note. You're getting the idea here. Then I could do the the bass and then the top 2. And then I'm ready to put that together. And having done that preliminary work, I've got a much more secure feeling in my hand than I would have had I just started off just playing the left hand by itself. So of course we can put that together in the strands. I can play my top line against my bass line. I can play my melody line against the harmony as blocks. And this is all really useful stuff when we're learning a new piece. The other thing I'm going to show you is, I call this the floating fermata, which is where we put an imaginary pause sign where we want. So let's say I'm beginning working on the Brahms Intermezzo Opus 119, number 1, this gorgeous piece. Let's say I found that was too much information on the page for me to digest all at once. What I do, or what I could do, is to put controlled stops in. I'm going to stop on the bar line. So before I play, I've organized my first bar. I can imagine what that sounds like. I can imagine what it feels like. I've looked through. Now I can take as long as I want before I play the next bar. Again, I organize it. It's a little bit like the golfer, you know, who no golfer ever took out a club from their bag and just swung at the ball. They stand there for a good few minutes, don't they? And I'm no golfer, but they stand there like that and get ready for what they're going to do. And then when you're ready, pause. And after a few repetitions of that, you'll find that the pauses get shorter and shorter. It's a little bit like scaffolding. It's useful until it's no longer useful, in which case you take it down. It's a very good way of learning with controlled stops rather than accidental stops. I hope that's given you a few ideas for learning new pieces, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks so much.
У жизни короткая программа. Родился, женился, детей родил, на работу ходил.
Watching.
Обожрешься, понимаешь? Обожрешься. Третий раз уже ем сегодня. Нет, там чай пил. Ну да, вообще-то. Почему сейчас, по-моему, рука слабая? Слабый чуть-чуть. Ладно, все, поехали. Поехали. Это уже лишнее. А, это двойная еда, думаешь? Ну, там просто одна была.
Let's say I found that was too much information on the page for me to digest all at once. What I do, or what I could do, is to put controlled stops in. I'm going to stop on the bar line. So before I play, I've organized my first bar. I can imagine what that sounds like. I can imagine what it feels like. I've looked through. Now I can take as long as I want before I play the next bar. Again, I organize it. It's a little bit like the golfer, you know, who no golfer ever took out a club from their bag and just swung at the ball. They stand there for a good few minutes, don't they? And I'm no golfer, but they stand there like that and get ready for what they're going to do. Took out a club from their bag and just swung at the ball. Now I can take as long as I want before I play the next bar. Again, I organize it. It's a little bit like the golfer, you know, who no golfer ever took out a club from their bag and just swung at the ball. They stand there for a good few minutes, don't they? And I'm no golfer, but they stand there like that and get ready for what they're going to do. And then when you're ready, pause. And after a few repetitions of that, you'll find that the pauses get shorter and shorter. It's a little bit like scaffolding. It's useful until it's no longer useful, in which case you take it down. It's a very good way of learning with controlled stops rather than accidental stops. I hope that's given you a few ideas for learning new pieces, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks so much for watching.
К 2030 году 17% профессий будут заменены голосовыми роботами. Скорее всего, вы уже встречались с этими роботами, когда вам звонили с интернет-магазинов, с банков, и вы думали, что вы общались с живыми людьми. На самом деле нет. Вы разговаривали с роботом, который может распознавать ваши ответы.
Coming to you from Steinway Hall in the centre of London. Of course, if you think about the hand, we've got the strong fingers on the insides, the thumb and the second finger and the third finger. Yes, they are stronger than the fourth and fifth finger, but it doesn't mean to say that there's anything wrong with that situation. So I'm going to show you a little bit about how we can make the pinky and the fourth finger actually feel really good and strong without doing exercises to supposedly strengthen them. I'm not a great believer in these exercises that's supposed to strengthen fingers, because actually our fingers are strong enough already to play the piano. What we need to do is to remember a few key points about alignment and rotation and arm involvement. Rather like if you think about running. We don't run with our feet only, do we? So we run with our body, and the feet happen to be on the end of the body, the contact of the body with the floor. And it would be ludicrous to do exercises to strengthen the foot in order to run. But a lot of pianists think, oh, I need to strengthen my fourth and my fifth finger, and they sit there for hours doing exercises that are actually going to make it worse, certainly won't improve it. Now, here's an exercise that you're going to find, this type of exercise you'll find in any book of technical exercises. This happens to come from Jeffrey Tankard and Eric Harrison's book, Piano Technique on an Hour a Day. First of all, that's much too long. I wouldn't do an hour a day. And I'm not saying I wouldn't, there isn't value in these exercises, but let's look at it. I'll show you right hand. And then down, the similar. But if you can see really closely what I'm doing, you will discover that I'm doing two things. One is I'm aligned on my third and my fourth and my fifth finger. My arm is behind those three fingers, as opposed to this sort of position, which is a thumb alignment. So we want alignment on the third and the fourth and the fifth finger. Now another thing I'm doing, which to me is second nature, is to rotate into the key rather than lift my finger from here. So I'm avoiding lifting my finger from the main knuckle, and instead I think you'd agree that's very strong and pretty fast. What I've got going in there is absolutely zero effort, zero tension in my arm, and my thumb is extremely free and loose. And I'm using rotary movements, fast, kind of turbocharged.
Ну, ладно, я молчу. Молчал уже, молчал. Будет хорошо. Да. Ну, не понял. Представляешь, как интересно. Оказывается, вот это вот против женского существа. Ну, то есть, нет, я не говорю, я никогда не обижаются, он просто так. То есть женщины по природе, они вот не такие. Ну да. Ну, типа вот это направдано, это все знают, что направдано мужикам. Я просто, ну, вообще в целом, да. То есть, да. Возможно, они даже удовольствие от этого не получают. Да. То есть, ну да. Вот я не знаю, как эту загадку разгадать, я же не женщина, да. Но я точно знаю, что моя дочка такой не должна быть, понимаешь? Понимаешь, например, скажем, или мама, или сестра там. Нет, жена-то ладно, хрен с ней. Деньги еще может принесет, да, чуть-чуть. Он то сам уже говорил. Просто. Ну, жена же это, в принципе, бесполое существо, согласна? Откуда ты знаешь такой секрет? Понял, ладно. Шутка это была такая просто. Ну, счастливый просто. Что-то интереснее было, да, вот так. Один добрый человек, муж и жена, добрые люди вместе. Ладно, не касается. Вот это просто офигеть, понимаешь? Вот я типа думаю, ну я не женат, меня потому что вот, например, ну нет, это как объяснить так. Это их проблема, это проститутка как бы, это понятно. Ну как бы я не пытаюсь обидеть или что-то такое сказать. Просто как сказать, ну как бы, да, ну вот, фиг его знает. На показ себя выставлять, это даже мужик не каждый станет, понимаешь? То есть когда это целесообразно. Ну типа того. Ну да. Ничего, это фигня все. Там. Первое впечатление просто, да. То есть там не качество работы, например. Первое лично не понял, да. Ну не важно. То есть ты так никогда не подумаешь. То есть здесь какая подсознательная реакция у тебя, когда ты такое смотришь, и ты понимаешь, что это нормально, что женщина вот такая она должна быть, это таковое оно и есть, а сам ты не женщина, понимаешь? Поэтому ты так и воспринимаешь эти, что они такие должны быть. То есть, ну да. Потом они, ну как бы, как тебе сказать, значит много у тебя будет очень веселая судьба, значит наверняка, да. Ну да, понятно. А тебе наплевать, что ты как бы, ты же не мужчина, ты же семьянин, правильно? Ты же не собираешься быть мужиком. Типа, ну да. Просто приятного аппетита, отдыха, водки там и всех выходных вам, конечно, и всего остального. Ну да, меня не касается это, я просто. Да, то есть как бы все. Типа, да. Ну нет, что главное, денег заработал, отдал своей Мигере, идешь гулять там, вечеринку делать, или что там, с пацанами, рыбалку рыбачить, хобби хоббечить какое-нибудь. В игрушки играть, концертмейстер в подвале сидеть играть. Дал Мигере получку. Ну как бы, к примеру, я тебе просто объясняю, без разницы. Да, детство вспоминать, 90-е годы. Меня не касается это, я просто так тебе говорю, да. Ну, на хобби тоже деньги нужны, но это меня не я просто, да. Ну да. Но это не развивает тебя, то развивает. Ну, это не важно, у тебя дальше, ну понял, ладно. Да нет, она поняла себя. То, что бесплатно, то позорно, понимаешь, когда мужик делает что-то в виде хобби, оно всегда позорно будет, понимаешь? Потому что ты же не девица красная, девчонка какая-то, понимаешь? Ну, у девочек наоборот, понимаешь? Да. А хобби тебе заводить, кто тебе даст? Как бы не за мой счет, а ты что не беременная, такие у тебя хобби? Не для хобби. Вот ребенок родился, вот с ним и живи. Еще с там и так далее, что тебе еще надо? Потом уже следующий, где уже этот уже сам бегает. Ну ладно, я не волнуюсь, кстати. Я просто, что хотел сказать. Ну, представляешь, Женя, ну да, я понял уже. А ведь никто даже, вот, нет, я вот не понимаешь, я вот и меня там на гуман понимает она меня, да? То есть я, да, женщина, она не блядь, понимаешь, она не должна быть такой вот. Все ведь понимают это, не потому что там понарошку, не потому что там старое поверье какое-то или предание, вот просто по женскому организму, нет, вот так не думают они просто. Просто вот у них внутри такое спрятано, понимаешь, есть добро, какое-то знание, вот, что она не шлюха, понимаешь. Я не знаю зачем, они же не все, то есть ты видишь вот одну, а там, ну, например, 5 будут таких, 5 таких, например, да, то есть 5, ты же видишь то, что на поверхности, правильно, и многие женщины же, их просто нету их в интернетах всяких, вот они даже вот так вот фоткаться не будут скромненько, да, то есть есть зачем жить свою жизнь, или даже вот так вот там, понимаешь, ну их мало, наверное, не так много, как ты ожидаешь, но тем не менее, да, понимаешь, нет, в том-то и дело, что как бы ничего, нет, вот просто для себя это не живу, да, ну потому что кайф, счастье, потому что, ну, это немножко мужские слова, да, понимаете, ну что это настоящая жизнь у меня, понимаешь, как бы, да, без денег, когда, понимаешь, да может и так даже, я не знаю, да, то есть ты понимаешь, как бы, мама, да, это, наверное, если вот так вот мы кутенками, понимаем, наверное, ладно, это я не к пафосу же, просто тебе говорю, что нам, это, вот детство любишь свое, помнишь нам? Видишь, ну да, он понимает на себя. Ладно, я просто уже. То есть, жизнь души, она не вот такая, правильно? Не с титками и даже не на показе, даже не мудрая какая-то такая, маманда там с индуистской, а просто, да, и, да. То есть она поняла тебя, да. Представляешь, а я да. Они все на показ, потому что, видимо, они либо шлюхи, либо не знаю, то есть, ну, как бы, ну как-то им надо тоже, надо, не знаю я. Но вы-то не думаешь. Ну, кто уж там как-то, да. Но они же замужние еще, понимаешь? Меня это не волнует, я просто говорю, что... Нет, это не... Меня не касается. Мне... Да. Как по-настоящему будет. Вот она по-настоящему получается. Я не против, я же кобель, мне-то вообще насрать. Если, понимаешь, как бы я только знаю, что я не хочу, чтобы моя сестра была такой и там и так далее. Ну ладно, меня не касается. Наверное, вот такого бы не было, если бы как бы типа того, да. Ну, понимаешь. Ну, мы не придумали это, этот мир, понимаешь, надо за собой только следить, да. Нет, ну как бы, тогда бы Женька Губаев нормально был бы счастлив и женат, как бы, наверное, да, вот такой, это, ну ты понимаешь. Ну, из ситуации минус надо тратить время, чтобы выйти в плюс, понимаешь? Да. А не наоборот, понимаешь, да? То есть, ну, понимаете, это... Ну не знаю, ладно. Ну ладно. Вражда. Нет, это не жизнь, конечно, вражда, это все, это мы поделиться. Так, это все теплое. Ну как бы, чтобы лучше было, наверное, да, не знаю, просто так надо, понимаешь, как по-другому. Вот я не хочу, чтобы моя жена была наркоманка, которая там по кафе шастает даже, я даже знать не хочу, что они там, понимаешь, там сидя флиртуют даже с кем-то как бы втихаря там, или еще что-нибудь там, ну, например. Да, типа того, уж не говоря, то, что, ну, она понимает себя, ну да, она, конечно, этого хочет, то есть, потому что она женщина, это нормально для них. Быть, да, лживыми мегерами, как-то, мирными, как бы, что там, понимаешь. Ну вот получается так вот, да, как ты будешь такой психологией выживать после, что будет, ну, да, понимает она себя, да. Ну, да, она знает, да, ну, она про себя так говорит. Нет, это понятно, я тебе к примеру просто говорю, просто, да. Меня это не волнует, я тебе, да. То есть, изначально просто, как бы, да. Ну, понятно, Нет, это все равно, ну, она поняла тебя там, ну, можно было, да, вытащить, затащить, как говорится, да. Это уже было, да, все равно. Это не важно, если уже сошлось, как говорится, так или иначе, если уже как бы там это самое, тогда будет, да, понимаете, значит. По-нормальному, конечно, вот так, не по-татарски, значит, да, лучше, значит. Ну, вот это не зависит, наверное, от национальности просто в целом. Да, то есть,